Welcome back to The Curious Case, where we slow time, one mystery at a time. Tonight's story begins with a portrait and a secret it refused to forget. They say every painting tells two stories, the one it shows and the one it hides. Sometimes, the silence between brushstrokes can speak louder than words. A face painted a century ago can still hold its breath, waiting for someone to notice what doesn't belong. This evening, we travel to Ashton Hall, a quiet English estate wrapped in rain and remembrance. Within its walls hangs a portrait too lifelike for comfort. The woman in it smiles faintly, but her eyes seem aware. Have you ever felt that the strange pull of a picture, as if the subject knows you exist, as if she remembers something you have forgotten? Miss Marple once said, "Human nature leaves traces in ink, in speech, in paint." And tonight, those traces will speak again. So pour your tea, dim the light, and listen closely, because sometimes a portrait doesn't just remember, it accuses. Welcome to The Portrait That Remembered, a Miss Marple mystery about art, memory, and the price of silence. Rain fell with a steady patience that only English skies can manage. Each drop found the glass, lingered, and slipped away. Inside the small sitting room on the high street, Miss Marple's lamp burned low and warm. Her knitting lay folded beside the teapot. Outside, the village slept under a curtain of soft rain and chimney smoke. The clock on the mantel ticked in its usual steady rhythm, a sound she found companionable. It had been another quiet evening in Street Mary Mead. Letters sorted, cat fed, fire coaxed into life. Peace the kind that older souls treasure. Then came the knock. Not hurried, not timid either, just precise. The kind that announced good breeding or bad news. Miss Marple rose, straightened her cardigan, and opened the door. On the step stood a uniformed boy from the post office, cap dripping. "Special delivery, ma'am," he said, handing her an envelope sealed with dark green wax. She thanked him, closed the door gently, and studied the letter under the lamplight. The seal bore a crest, an ash leaf, and the motto Semper Memor, always remembering. The handwriting was elegant, practiced, with the faint hesitation of wealth used to dictation. She opened it carefully, preserving both wax and impression. "My dear Miss Marple, Lady Ashton of Ashton Hall requests the pleasure of your company tomorrow afternoon to view a newly restored family portrait of historical importance. Tea to follow. Carriage will collect you at 3. She smiled faintly. "Tea and a portrait," she murmured. "One hopes both are fresh." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far across the downs. The sound arrived softly, like a warning politely delivered. Miss Marple set the invitation beside the teapot and returned to her chair. The fire crackled, protesting a little. She adjusted her shawl, eyes narrowing in thought. Ashton Hall. She remembered it ivy climbing its gables, and a family proud enough to frame their history in oil and gilt. But pride, she reflected, was a fragile varnish. It cracks if left too long in one light. The rain continued its gentle rhythm. On the sill, droplets gathered, merged, and fell like minutes passing in liquid form. In the corner, the clock chimed 9. Another day done. Another mystery not yet begun. Miss Marple looked toward the window. For a moment, the glass caught the reflection of her own face, pale, patient, faintly amused. A woman long acquainted with secrets that visit without warning. She reached for her knitting but didn't begin. Something about the phrasing in that letter stayed in her mind. Newly restored family portrait of historical importance. Restoration, she knew, could mean many things. Sometimes it meant cleaning away the years. Sometimes it meant hiding them. The rain deepened. A steady hush against the roof. Somewhere, a carriage wheel splashed through puddles, fading into distance. Miss Marple folded her hands, gaze drifting toward the darkened window once more. "Always remembering," she whispered, repeating the motto, her voice barely more than the sound of thread through wool. The lamp flickered, caught by a stray draught. Its light fell across the letter, the green wax gleaming faintly, like a waiting eye. Outside, the storm gathered strength. The village slept on, unaware that a small envelope had just opened a door that would not easily close. In the silence between raindrops, Miss Marple's intuition stirred quiet, steady, certain. Whatever waited at Ashton Hall, it would not be merely art. She knew the feeling well. Her fingers resumed their knitting, each stitch measured, each loop neat. Yet her mind was already far from street. Mary Mead, travelling through rain toward a house where faces hung in silence. And as the night deepened, she whispered once more not a prayer, but a truth she had learned long ago. But some faces, she said softly, never rest easy in their frames. The carriage rolled up the gravel drive of Ashton Hall. Rain softened to a mist. Clouds still pressed low as if listening. Miss Marple stepped down, careful with her umbrella. The butler bowed, silent as a clock striking the hour. Inside, warmth waited but not ease. The drawing-room smelled faintly of polish and roses. A fire burned, too bright for the mild afternoon. Lady Ashton stood near the mantel, every gesture precise. Grace made into habit. "Miss Marple," she said, smiling thinly. "How kind of you to come." "An invitation from beauty, my lady," Marple replied gently, "is not easily declined." Tea was laid in silver and porcelain. A single portrait faced the room, veiled still, its outline ghost-like in the light. Miss Marple's eyes lingered there, then moved to the company gathered. Margaret Ashton, the niece fair, nervous, her hands restless with the teacup. Too young to hide her emotions, too old to pretend she didn't try. She laughed often, but never finished the sound. Dr. Felton, tall, angular, spectacles polished to distraction. He stirred his tea, though he'd added nothing to it. Each movement exact, measured, as if precision might calm unease. Mr. Price, the art restorer, ink-stained fingers, a faint scent of turpentine clinging to his cuffs, eyes sharp, but tired. He studied the covered painting even as he spoke of weather and varnish. When Lady Ashton spoke, his smile tightened like canvas pulled too hard. The butler moved among them with the grace of long service, pouring, clearing, hearing everything. Miss Marple noticed. She always did. "Ancestral art," Lady Ashton said lightly, "has its moods. The portrait has been quite the project." Her gaze slid toward Mr. Price. He inclined his head. "Yes, my lady, the years were not kind to it." "Nor to those in it," she replied. The silence that followed was brief, but sharp, edged. Margaret tried to fill it. "I think it's lovely that the portrait will finally be seen again. Grandfather painted her, didn't he?" Lady Ashton's tone cooled. "An ancestor, yes, but perhaps not the one history remembers." Her teacup touched the saucer too firmly. Porcelain rang like a warning note. Miss Marple smiled politely, saying nothing. She observed the smallest things, the tremor in Margaret's spoon, the doctor's deliberate avoidance of the portrait, the restorer's tapping thumb, rhythmic, impatient. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but approaching. The air in the room felt thick, like breath held too long. Lady Ashton glanced toward the window. "The weather changes so quickly," she said. "As does company," murmured Miss Marple, just softly enough to be mistaken for a compliment. They spoke then of tea gardens, charity, drives, the village fete words light as pastry shells. But beneath them ran a hum, something unspoken, something that watched from behind the curtain of civility. At one point Margaret excused herself, returning pale, her hands damp. Dr. Felton asked nothing. Mr. Price smiled too quickly. Lady Ashton refilled her cup, though it was already full. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched in her bag. She preferred stillness today. Observation was its own craft. She noticed a small gilt frame on the side table, another painting, older, darker. Its glass reflected the window's rainlight. A face faintly visible, half erased by time. A woman with eyes too knowing. Miss Marple's voice broke the quiet. "Do you ever feel," she asked gently, "that paintings remember us longer than we remember them?" Lady Ashton's hand paused mid-air. The silver spoon clinked once. "Memory," she said after a beat, "isn't always a comfort, Miss Marple." The restorer looked up sharply. Dr. Felton set down his cup. Margaret's eyes flicked to the veiled portrait. The fire popped once, scattering sparks across the hearth. Outside, the wind rose, tugging at the panes. Tea grew cold, talk quieter. In that hush, Miss Marple's intuition stirred faint but clear. She had seen this before. Not the room, not the faces, the pattern. Gentility wrapped around guilt. Charm laid carefully over something waiting to crack. Lady Ashton smiled again, polite, polished, perfect. "Shall we unveil her tomorrow, Miss Marple?" "Yes," said Marple softly. Tomorrow sounds eventful. And outside the rain began again, steady, deliberate, and patient, as if it already knew what the portrait remembered. The next afternoon arrived under a bruised sky. Rain had stopped, but the air still held its memory. Wet earth, cold light, quiet that listened back. Miss Marple arrived precisely at 3. The carriage wheels hissed on damp gravel. Windows of Ashton Hall gleamed like wet glass eyes. Inside, candles were already lit, unnecessary but deliberate. Lady Ashton stood by the veiled portrait, nervous poise wrapped in silk. Margaret lingered near the fire, twisting a lace handkerchief. Dr. Felton adjusted his cuffs again and again. Mr. Price examined the ropes of the curtain that hid his work. "Shall we begin?" Lady Ashton said. Her voice carried too lightly, as if afraid it might echo back something unwelcome. The butler dimmed the lamps. Thunder rumbled not loud, but near enough to answer. "Mr." Price stepped forward. His hands, though steady, bore faint traces of paint and polish. He bowed slightly, then tugged the cord. The veil fell. The portrait emerged, a Victorian woman. Pearl at her throat, lace at her wrist, expression soft, eyes almost kind. Almost. The room breathed as one. Even Miss Marple leaned slightly closer. At first glance, beauty. At second, unease. Something just off-center, the eyes not aligned. One slightly lower, as though it watched from another plane. Margaret gasped softly. "Is that?" "Your great-grandmother," Lady Ashton said quickly. Her tone closed the question before it could breathe. Mr. Price cleared his throat. "The damage was extensive. Years of moisture, poor storage. I did what was possible." Miss Marple studied the canvas. The varnish caught the candlelight strangely. Not flat, not still. The surface shimmered as if something beneath were trying to rise. The thunder rolled again, nearer this time. The chandelier trembled. One of the candles guttered out. Margaret whispered, "She looks alive." Lady Ashton's fan snapped open. "Sentiment, my dear. Nothing more." "But even she didn't look too long, Mr." Price stepped closer, inspecting his own work. He frowned. "There," he said softly, pointing. Along the right cheek, a faint glisten. A small drop rolled downward. At first, everyone thought it was moisture from the air. Then another formed, and another, trailing through the painted varnish like tears. Margaret stepped back. "Doctor," Felton muttered something under his breath, science, trying to find footing. Lady Ashton's colour drained, though her posture did not. Miss Marple said nothing. Her gaze travelled from the weeping face to the restorer's trembling hand. "It happens," Price stammered. "Old oils reacting to heat or memory," murmured Miss Marple. No one replied. The wind pressed against the windows. A single raindrop struck the pane, distinct and timed. Lady Ashton turned abruptly. "I think that's enough for today." Her voice wavered, controlled by will alone. The butler moved to cover the portrait again. But the cloth caught on the gilt frame and tore slightly, leaving the face half-shrouded, half-seen, one eye visible. Still watching. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her umbrella handle. She saw the tension in every back, the silence between breaths. This was no ordinary painting. Something beneath those layers had not been buried deep enough. Dr. Felton stepped closer, squinting. "There's writing," he said. Under the tear marks, faint lettering traced in varnish. Invisible until the light hit it. No one spoke. The thunder answered instead. A low, resonant growl. "Letters?" Lady Ashton repeated. "Initials, perhaps," Felton muttered. Or an artist's mark, but his tone betrayed uncertainty. Mr. Price wiped his brow. "I'll inspect it in better light." He reached forward, but Miss Marple's voice stopped him. "I wouldn't touch it again just yet, Mr. Price." He froze. Their eyes met. For a moment, no sound, only rain beginning again outside, soft but relentless. Miss Marple's voice was calm. "Some paintings reveal themselves when the light changes. Others prefer the dark." The candles flickered. The air grew colder, though the fire burned high. Even Lady Ashton shivered once, quickly disguising it as a sigh. The butler replaced the torn cover as best he could. The face disappeared mostly. Only the edge of one painted eye remained visible through the rip. Miss Marple turned toward the window. Storm clouds rolled, darker now. The sound of distant rain deepened into rhythm, almost like breathing. "Curious," she said softly. "Paint should dry with age, but sometimes it remembers." The others looked at her, uncertain whether she meant chemistry or ghosts. Her gaze returned to the portrait, still glistening faintly in the dim light. And as thunder cracked once more above Ashton Hall, she added quietly, "Because some faces, when they weep, aren't crying for themselves." Morning brought pale sunlight through low clouds. The storm had passed, leaving behind the hush that follows confession. Miss Marple arrived early at Ashton Hall. Lady Ashton had not yet descended. Only Mr. Price and Dr. Pice. Felton occupied the library, where the portrait had been moved for examination. The smell of turpentine lingered. Sharp, clean, nervous. Mr. Price bent over the painting, brush in hand, performing small repairs. Dr. Felton stood beside him, notebook open, pretending to understand art. Miss Marple's step was light. She paused by the door, unnoticed, long enough to hear the restorer mutter, "2 layers. Impossible." Then he caught sight of her reflection in the glass frame and straightened. "Ah, Miss Marple, you startled me." "An easy thing, in a house where everyone whispers," she said gently. She came closer. The portrait rested against an easel, face tilted toward the grey morning. The surface gleamed faintly calmer now, but alive in its stillness. Her eyes went to the lower corner, where something had caught the light. "May I?" she asked. Mr. Price hesitated, then nodded. She leaned forward. Her spectacles glinted. "There," she said quietly. Beneath the varnish, 2 signatures. He frowned. "Reflections, perhaps?" "No," she replied softly. "Lines, different pressure. One older, one fresher." She traced the air above the canvas without touching it. The older in sepia, the newer darker, sharper, almost defensive. "Doctor." Felton cleared his throat. "Painters often sign their works twice, do they not?" "Not usually on top of one another," Marple said. Her voice was mild, but her eyes were not. Price sighed. "Old restorations sometimes add marks. Identification, ownership, cataloguing." "And who, Mr. Price," she asked, "would catalogue a ghost?" He blinked, confused. "I beg your pardon?" "Nothing," she said. "An idle thought." The clock ticked between them. Outside a rook called once, echoing through damp air. Dr. Felton looked uncomfortable. He shut his notebook with a snap. "Lady Ashton has invited us for luncheon. I believe we should—" "Yes, doctor," said Marple, not turning. Always wise to eat before asking difficult questions. The restorer wiped his hands with a cloth already streaked with pigment. "It's trivial, I assure you. The top mark is mine. Retouching protocol." Her head tilted. "Then you've signed it?" "For record purposes only." "So your name rests above another?" "Yes." "How curious," she murmured, "that even paint carries hierarchy." He forced a small laugh. "You have an eye for detail, Miss Marple." "I only have eyes," she replied. "They tend to notice when 2 truths overlap." He looked away. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple despite the cold room. Dr. Felton stepped toward the window. "Quite a morning," he said brightly. "Fresh air will do us all good." Miss Marple remained still. She studied the faint outline beneath Price's claim. The older signature, delicate, cursive, began with an A, not the family painter's name. Something else. Something hidden deliberately, not erased completely. "Would you like tea, Mr. Price?" she asked. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Yes, that would be—" "No milk," she interrupted. "You don't take it. I noticed yesterday." He froze mid-turn. How observant. "Observation," she said, "is the one habit I've never managed to break." He smiled again, brittle, thin, then bent to polish the frame, avoiding her gaze. "Doctor." Felton mumbled an excuse and left the room. The door clicked behind him. For a moment, only the tick of the clock remained, and the faint crackle of varnish under drying light. Miss Marple stepped closer once more. The double signature seemed to breathe two identities trapped in one corner, one asserting, the other surviving. Her fingers hovered above the canvas. No touch, only thought. The letters beneath were faint but deliberate. She could almost see them. A. P. Something unfinished. Her eyes lifted to Mr. Price, who was now pretending to rearrange brushes. "You must find it gratifying," she said softly, "to restore forgotten things." He glanced over, uncertain whether it was compliment or question. "Yes," he said after a pause. "It gives them life again." "Indeed," she replied, "though sometimes they take it back." He looked sharply at her, then away. A draught stirred the curtains. The fire crackled once, startling both. Lady Ashton's voice called faintly from the corridor. "Mr. Price, the carriage for town will be ready shortly." "Yes, my lady," he answered quickly. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves. She turned once more to the portrait. The faint buried name caught the light like a secret blinking awake. She spoke almost to herself. Two signatures, two truths. Only one can dry without cracking. And as she left the room, the varnish shifted again, revealing, just for an instant, the ghost of a line beneath the painter's mark. Not erased, merely waiting. Midnight crept over Ashton Hall like breath on glass. The rain had stopped, but thunder still wandered far off, slow, tired, echoing across the hills. Most lights were out. Only the long corridor lamps burned faintly, halos trembling against wallpaper patterned with ivy. The servants were restless. Old houses hold sound differently at night. Every creak is a footstep, every draught a whisper. Mrs. Kent, the housekeeper, woke first. She heard its steady footsteps above her room, measured, unhurried. She thought it was the butler, until she remembered he'd retired early with a cold. Still, the steps continued, across the landing, down the upper corridor. Then silence. She lit her candle. Its flame bent left draught from the east wing. Something open. She wrapped a shawl, left her room, and called softly into the dark. "Who's there?" No reply. Only the echo of her own question. At the same moment, Miss Marple stirred. She had been awake, reading by lamplight, a chapter she hadn't followed. Her mind had been too busy counting inconsistencies. The second signature. The tears on varnish. The silence after truth. She heard the same sound footsteps muffled by carpet, too deliberate for wind. She rose, slipped her shawl around her shoulders, and opened her door. The corridor stretched ahead, long and dim. One candle still burned halfway down. Its wick flickered with movement. Someone had just passed. "Hello?" Her voice carried softly, absorbed by the house. Still no answer. From the far end came a faint scrape. Wood against wall. A heavy drag. Then a sound like canvas shifting. She walked slowly, careful with each step. The air smelled faintly of linseed and polished the scent of the library's art collection. When she reached the corner, she stopped. The portrait. It stood in the corridor now, not the library. Turned to face the wall, completely reversed. The lamp's light fell across its gilded back. For a moment, she simply watched. Houses have ways of testing the nerves, but this had intention. Behind her, footsteps again. Faster now. The butler, half-dressed, holding a lantern. "Miss Marple, what on earth?" She raised a finger for quiet. "Listen." A door slammed somewhere upstairs. The sound rolled through the hallway like distant thunder. Then nothing. Everyone's to stay in their rooms, she said calmly. Send for Lady Ashton. He hesitated. Ma'am, the staff, they say they saw a man in the East Gallery. Her eyes narrowed. A man? Yes. Coat. Hat. They thought it was the restorer, Mr. Price. Mr. Price, she repeated. He left hours ago. Yes, ma'am, but his car's still out front. The corridor light trembled. The fire in the nearby sconce flickered lower. For a heartbeat, Miss Marple thought she heard something, a faint hum, like a note pressed on an unseen piano. She stepped closer to the portrait. Her candlelight grazed the edge of the frame. The varnish gleamed faintly at one corner, wet again, or pretending to be. Who moved you, I wonder? She whispered. Behind the painting, something rattled softly. A nail loosening, or something trapped behind. She leaned closer. The butler's lantern cast twin shadows along the wall, hers and the painting's, one steady, one not. She turned sharply. Did anyone lock the library? Yes, ma'am. The keys with the lady herself. Then Mr. Price, she murmured, had another way in. Downstairs, doors began to open, servants whispering. A dog barked once outside, then fell silent. Lady Ashton's voice rose from the staircase, brittle, alarmed. What is this noise? What's happened? The portrait, my lady, said the butler. It's moved. Lady Ashton stopped halfway up the steps, pale in, to the candlelight. Her eyes went to the overturned frame. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Felton appeared behind her, robe half-tied, spectacles askew. Moved, he repeated. By whom? That, said Miss Marple, depends whether you believe the living or the painted. A gust swept through the corridor. The flame bent. Something metallic clinked against the wall, a fallen nail, dislodged from the portrait's hook. Miss Marple stooped, picked it up, turned it in her fingers. New polish. Fresh metal. Recent use. She looked up at Lady Ashton. Your restorer, I think, is not yet resting. The words hung between them like the smell of oil and rain. And somewhere above, a door opened again, slow, deliberate, followed by a sound that could have been wind, or footsteps, or someone closing a chapter that hadn't quite ended. Morning came grey and hollow. No birds sang. Only the slow drip of rain from the roof's edge, the quiet breathing of a house that had seen too much. Miss Marple woke before dawn. She had not slept. The corridor disturbance still played in her thoughts, the turned portrait, the missing man. Something had shifted in more than paint. By 7, Ashton Hall stirred with unease. The kitchen fires burned low, the servants whispered. Every door seemed louder than usual. Every step echoed. Then came the cry. A maid, young, pale, running from the east wing. Her voice broke the morning stillness. They've found him. Miss Marple was already on her feet. No one had to say the name. The studio door stood open. Turpentine filled the air, sharp, chemical, choking. It stung the eyes, burned the throat. She stepped inside with care. Mr. Price lay near the easel, face downward. One hand stretched toward the window latch. The other still held a brush, its bristles stiff with red-brown paint. But it wasn't paint. The butler crossed himself. Lady Ashton turned away. Dr. Felton Knelt pressed 2 fingers to the wrist and shook his head. Gone, he said softly. An hour, perhaps 2. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room. The smell told her more than the sight. Turpentine, metal, and something faintly sweet oil gone rancid. The corner of the portrait on the easel was sliced clean away. A knife had done it. Deliberate, precise. She saw the line straight, practiced, unemotional. Where's the missing piece? She asked quietly. No one answered. She turned. Where? The maid sobbed. Dr. Felton rose. It isn't here, he said. We've searched. Perhaps he cut it to remove damage. Or to remove a secret, said Miss Marple. She moved closer to the easel. The edges of the cut still glistened. Fresh. Recent. A few flakes of pigment on the floor, pale green and ochre. She bent down, picked one up. Old paint. But the varnish. Her eyes narrowed. Someone had cleaned it, recently and badly. The turpentine puddled nearby wasn't just for art. It was cover. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Firm, measured. The sound of law approaching. Inspector Slack entered, coat wet from rain, cap tilted, eyes already sharp. "Miss Marple," he said with faint exasperation, "why is it you're always present when trouble decides to paint itself red?" She smiled mildly. "Habit, Inspector. I follow interesting brushwork." He crouched by the body, grimacing at the smell. "Suicide?" he asked. "No," said Miss Marple. "Too tidy." Slack raised an eyebrow. "Explain." She pointed to the cut corner. "To remove evidence, you must first know it's there." He found something, Inspector. Something that frightened someone else more than it frightened him. Slack looked around. "Any sign of struggle?" "None," said Dr. Felton quickly. "Yet his chair is overturned," Marple noted. "And the brush still in his hand. That's theatre, not accident." Lady Ashton spoke, then voice tight. "He was working on the portrait, alone. He insisted on staying through the night." Her eyes flicked to the damaged frame. What could he possibly have found? Miss Marple's gaze returned to the missing corner. "The part removed," she said softly, "was the lower right near the signature." Dr. Felton frowned. "You mean?" "I mean," she said, "whatever name once lay beneath his own, he found it." Slack straightened. "So the man signed his death warrant when he scraped that paint." "Or someone else signed it for him," she replied. He took notes quickly. "Servants saw anyone after midnight?" "Only footsteps," said Lady Ashton. "And that was hours before," Miss Marple added. "Yet the smell of turpentine is fresh. Someone returned to this room after his death to clean, not to mourn." Slack's pen paused mid-air. "Clean?" "Yes. Murder rarely cleans up its own brushstrokes." He gave her a look half irritation, half respect. "Then who did, Miss Marple?" She turned toward the door. Rain streaked the window beside it, the light grey and lifeless. "Whoever feared what the painting was about to say," she murmured. "And paintings, Inspector, are remarkably patient witnesses." He followed her gaze. The torn canvas hung crookedly, like a mouth trying to speak through silence. One corner missing, one secret freed. Behind them the fire hissed in the grate. The smell of turpentine thickened, heavy as guilt. And outside, thunder rumbled again, soft, but close enough to make the window glass tremble. Miss Marple touched the edge of the easel once, gently. Her gloves came away smeared faintly red. Not paint. She wiped them clean, then whispered to herself, "No, Inspector. Murder never paints just one stroke. Rain again. Fine, thin, relentless. The kind that seeps into stone and bone alike." Inspector Slack ordered the painting removed to the small library. "Safer there," he said. "Brighter light, less noise." Miss Marple simply nodded. She had learned that inspectors always preferred good lighting for bad discoveries. The damaged portrait now rested on a long oak table, its missing corner covered with brown paper. A technician from the county museum had arrived with strange equipment, a portable X-ray lamp, humming softly like a wasp in a jar. Lady Ashton hovered near the door, pale but composed. Dr. Felton busied himself with notes he didn't need. Margaret sat rigid in a chair, eyes fixed on the painting as if it might blink. Miss Marple took her seat quietly, knitting in hand, though the needles never moved. Her attention stayed on the machine. Technology, she thought, was merely curiosity in electrical form. The technician adjusted dials. "We'll see the layers," he said. "Old work often hides earlier attempts. Painters changed minds, corrected errors." "Or covered them," Miss Marple murmured. The switch clicked. A thin, white beam washed across the canvas. The air seemed to hold its breath. At first, nothing. Only lines, cracks, textures. Then faint outlines appeared, ghostly strokes beneath the surface. The woman's face remained the same, but her hands were different. In the restored painting, they rested demurely on her lap. In the X-ray shadow, one hand gripped something narrow and pale. The technician leaned closer. Looks like parchment. Possibly a letter. A letter, repeated Slack, writing quickly. Sealed, Miss Marple added, her eyes on the image. The ghostly envelope was clear, folded, bound by ribbon, painted with intention, removed with care. Lady Ashton's voice broke softly. I had no idea. Few families, said Miss Marple, enjoy discovering that their ancestors wrote things best forgotten. The technician clicked off the light. The after-image lingered like memory behind the eyes, pale fingers, dark ribbon, sealed truth. Slack turned to Lady Ashton. Do you know of any letter connected with this portrait? None, she said quickly. Too quickly. It was painted by my husband's grandfather. Family lore says it commemorated a marriage alliance. That's all. Was it a happy one? Asked Marple gently. Lady Ashton hesitated. History never says. Dr. Felton stepped forward. If a hidden layer exists, perhaps the restorer discovered it last night. That could explain why he, met trouble. Yes, said Miss Marple. Painters reveal what time conceals, but sometimes they reveal it to the wrong audience. The technician began to pack his instruments. Slack watched, thoughtful. Can we recover what's underneath? Not without stripping the upper paint, the man said. Risky. Could destroy both. Then we leave it, Slack muttered. Miss Marple shook her head. Some letters, she said, will insist on being read. Margaret finally spoke. Could the letter have been real, painted from life? Likely, said Marple. Art mirrors truth but rarely flatters it. The inspector paced. So, Price finds this. Someone silences him. The question is, what frightened them? The image or the message? Both, said Miss Marple softly. A secret looks harmless until someone frames it. Outside, thunder grumbled again, faint, polite, but closer. A draft crept under the library door, stirring the edge of the brown paper covering the cut corner. It fluttered like a heartbeat. Miss Marple's gaze lingered there. That missing piece, she thought, might have shown the hand holding the letter the proof, not the rumor. Someone had removed it carefully, as one removes a page from history. Lady Ashton spoke again, voice brittle. I want this painting locked away. No one touches it again. Inspector Slack nodded, already signaling an officer. Miss Marple rose slowly. Lock it, yes, she said. But remember, locks preserve as well as hide. As the men carried the portrait out, a faint reflection caught her eye. The candlelight slid across the varnish like breath over glass. For a moment she thought she saw the woman's painted eyes glisten again, not tears this time, but warning. The door closed. The rain intensified, drumming steady against the panes. Slack exhaled. Well, Miss Marple, what do you make of it? She looked toward the empty doorway. Underpaint inspector, she said. The world above always thinks it's finished. The world beneath knows better. He frowned. Meaning? She smiled faintly. Meaning the portrait isn't the only thing with layers. Outside, lightning flared once white, brief, silent. In that flash, every shadow of Ashton Hall seemed to remember what it was hiding. By morning, the storm had passed. The air was washed clean but uneasy. Sunlight struggled through mist. The garden dripped quietly, as though catching its breath. Miss Marple sat in the small parish office beside the churchyard. The vicar's study smelled of old paper and damp wool. Ledger books lay open across the table, brown ink, neat columns, forgotten names. Inspector Slack leaned near the window, hat in hand. He disliked paperwork. She adored it. It always told the truth without realizing it had done so. The vicar adjusted his spectacles. This is the parish record for 1892, he said, the year the painting is said to have been completed. He traced a finger along the margin. Yes, here. Lydia Green. Buried March 2nd. Slack frowned. Buried? The portrait's dated June. Precisely, Miss Marple murmured. Which makes it a curious sort of sitting. The vicar nodded gravely. The Greens were a quiet family. Local gentry. Her husband Charles died the previous winter. A widow painting a dead wife, Slack muttered. Or pretending to. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the inked lines. Each letter was steady. No hesitation. The hand of someone certain, not mistaken. She tapped the page gently. Once the dead are written down, Inspector, it's difficult to make them sit again for a portrait. Slack sighed. So who commissioned it? Let's find out, she said. The vicar turned another page. Here, payment entry. Same month. Donation for church repairs by C.G. That would be Charles Green. Slack frowned deeper. But you said he was dead. Yes, said the vicar. He was. The room went very quiet. Even the clock seemed to pause. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked once, softly. Then someone used his name, she said. Someone who wanted the world to believe Lydia was alive long enough to be painted. Slack rubbed his temple. Why? What's the point? Marple looked at the open ledger. To rewrite memory, Inspector. People do it every day. Artists just do it in oil. The vicar turned the next page. Another note. Commission filed under special permission, private portrait to remain unexhibited, signed by the artist himself. Initials. A.P. Slack looked up. Same initials you found under the second signature. Yes, said Marple, and the same hand that now lies in the churchyard. The vicar blinked. What do you mean? The restorer found those initials beneath his own name, she said. But he didn't know what they meant, or who was meant to stay buried with them. Slack's pen scratched across his notebook. All right. So A.P. painted Lydia Green after she was dead. Someone paid for it. Someone forged names. Someone killed to keep that quiet. But who benefits? Marple's eyes drifted toward the window. Beyond the glass, the gravestones leaned in the wet grass like tired witnesses. Perhaps the one who inherited, she said softly, or the one who shouldn't have. The vicar spoke again. There's another entry here. A transfer of property. Lydia Green's estate sold to a family named Ashton. Slack looked up sharply. Ashton? Yes, said Marple. The very same. The inspector stared. You think the Ashtons built their fortune on that commission? I think fortunes rarely start with truth, she said. She closed the ledger gently, brushing dust from the cover. The past, she thought, leaves fingerprints even when the hands are gone. Slack straightened. I'll need a copy of that record. The vicar nodded. Miss Marple rose. Her knees protested faintly, but her mind did not. As they stepped outside, the air felt heavy again. The sky had cleared, but the house on the hill seemed darker than before. Ashton Hall waited too still, too silent, too aware. Slack glanced sideways at her. Strange thing, painting a corpse. Not so strange, said Miss Marple quietly. People do it with their memories every day. They reached the gate. The bell above the church door tolled once long, low, precise. Marple paused, her eyes still on the ledger pages she carried. Ink dries, she said softly. But guilt, that seeps through the paper. She looked toward Ashton Hall. Its upper windows glimmered faintly in the distance like watchful eyes. The portrait, she said, was never a memorial, Inspector. It was a replacement. Slack stopped walking. Replacement for what? For a truth no one wished to see. The wind turned then, scattering petals across the wet stones. The village clock struck noon, and from the hilltop house a single chime answered slow, hollow, late. Afternoon light faded early. A grey hush spread through Ashton Hall. The house seemed quieter than before, as if listening for footsteps that would never return. Miss Marple sat in Lady Ashton's study, a room of order and lineage. Dark. Oak, heavy curtains, and the faint scent of lavender polish. On the desk lay boxes of family correspondence, bound in faded ribbons. The ink had browned, the paper crisped with time. Lady Ashton poured tea, her hands steady, but her eyes distant. You'll find nothing unusual, Miss Marple. Our papers are dull as our ancestors. I doubt dullness ever needed so many locks, Marple replied mildly. She slipped on her spectacles, untying the first ribbon. Letters fluttered out like tired moths, invitations, condolences, and receipts. Then, deeper in the stack, she found it. Different paper, thicker. addressed in the same hand she had seen beneath the painting's varnish. A.P. The ink had bled slightly with age. The tone formal, restrained but trembling under the surface. To Mrs. Lydia Green, by hand, private delivery. Your husband's new will is complete. It secures your property as intended. Once witnessed, no one may alter it. You must deliver it to the solicitor in London before month's end. Signed, A. Price. Miss Marple read it twice. Then she looked up. Lady Ashton's gaze had not left her. You recognize the hand? Marple said quietly. No, said Lady Ashton too quickly. Perhaps your grandfather's then? I've told you I know nothing of that period. Marple folded the paper carefully. Curious, she said. A will completed and never filed. A name familiar to this house, and a signature that has already died once. Lady Ashton's teacup trembled faintly. You're implying? I imply nothing, Marple interrupted gently. I only observe. And what I observe is an old letter kept among your family's papers, though addressed to another's widow. The silence grew taut. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly. Miss Marple spoke again, softer. Lydia Green's estate passed to your husband's grandfather. That much we know. But this letter suggests her inheritance was meant for another. Lady Ashton rose suddenly, pacing toward the window. The law settled that matter long ago. The law, yes, Marple said, but not conscience. Slack entered then, notebook in hand. He paused, seeing the tension. Have I interrupted? Only history, said Marple. She handed him the letter. He scanned it quickly, jaw tightening. So the restorer's ancestor wrote this. A Price same surname? Exactly, Marple replied. Perhaps not coincidence. Families like to forget, but paper remembers. Lady Ashton turned sharply. This is absurd. You think my family? I think, said Miss Marple, that someone suppressed a will to redirect an inheritance, and that the truth of it has been hanging on a wall for 50 years, sealed in varnish. Slack's pen stopped mid-note. So Price discovered it, tried to expose it, and someone silenced him before he could speak. Quite possibly, Marple said. Lady Ashton sank into the nearest chair. Her composure cracked just enough to reveal fatigue. My husband never knew, she whispered. No, said Marple gently, but perhaps he wondered. Families sense what they do not speak. The inspector looked between them. Do we have proof? Proof, said Marple, has a way of reappearing when guilt grows careless. She opened another envelope from the same box, inside a fragment of parchment, folded once. Same hand, different date. A single line written in haste. The letter was never sent. She died before it could leave the house. Miss Marple read it aloud. Lady Ashton's hand flew to her mouth. Slack exhaled slowly. So the sealed letter in the portrait was real, said Marple. Not symbolism, not art, evidence. She leaned back, her voice calm. Lydia Green's portrait hid her last act. She posed with the letter she could not deliver. The artist Price preserved it. The restorer uncovered it. And the present house, inspector, inherited both fortune and sin. Lady Ashton stared into the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, bright, unsteady. Her voice came barely above a whisper. Some things, she said, were never meant to be found. Miss Marple folded the letter once more. That, she replied softly, is what all ghosts say, my lady. The room fell silent again. Only the clock ticked on the mantel, marking seconds like footsteps walking away. Outside, wind stirred the ivy against the glass. The house breathed, uneasy. And on the desk, under dim afternoon light, the ink of the unsent letter seemed to glisten as if freshly written, as if still waiting to be delivered. The night returned heavy with wind. Rain hissed against stone. The air tasted of smoke and worry. Miss Marple sat in the small library once more. Inspector Slack stood beside her, arms folded, eyes fixed on the desk. Between them lay a box mahogany, velvet-lined, sealed with a rusted clasp. It was found in the attic, said Slack. The butler swears it's been there since Lord Ashton's father died. He pried it open carefully. Inside a wax cylinder, dark and dusted, still intact. Old sound waiting to breathe again. Miss Marple leaned closer. "Edison's kind," she said softly. "How very modern for 1890. They brought down an old phonograph from the museum wing. It groaned in protest when wound. Slack adjusted the needle, muttering, 'If it breaks, it's evidence lost. If it plays, it's trouble.' 'Either way,' said Marple, 'truth makes a noise.' The machine clicked to life. At first, only static, the hiss of time itself. Then a voice emerged, faint, cracked, male, measured, deliberate. 'My name is Albert Price.' Slack froze. Marple's eyes narrowed. 'Price?' she repeated softly. The voice continued, uneven, broken by scratches. 'This record is for proof. Should my work be questioned, the lady in the portrait was not alive when I painted her. She was gone. Her husband insisted I finish her likeness to comfort himself, he said. But I believe he sought to forge a signature, to sign her name where she could not.' The room went very still. Even the fire stopped crackling, or seemed to. I did as told. I signed my name beneath his. I thought it done. Then I was paid too much, too fast. I kept her letter, sealed as I found it. Couldn't destroy it, couldn't post it. Her hand was cold when I took it from her fingers. Slack muttered, 'Bloody hell.' Marple said nothing. The machine crackled again. The voice trembled. 'If any man hears this, he must know the portrait belongs to her bloodline, not his. The will exists, hidden in paint, under varnish, sealed with her image. Let them find it when they can bear it.' The cylinder skipped, a long pause. Then one final sentence, faint, fading. 'If they silence me, it will be another Price who pays the debt.' Then silence. The phonograph spun uselessly, hissing. Slack stopped it with a touch. The sound died like breath cut short. He looked at Miss Marple. 'Did you hear it? His name. Same voice. Price. But he's been dead for decades.' 'Yes,' she said quietly. 'And his descendant now lies in the same manner. The debt, Inspector, has been collected.' Slack ran a hand through his hair. 'You think it's family vengeance?' 'I think,' she said, 'that guilt breeds inheritance as surely as money does.' He paced. 'This proves forgery, fraud, maybe murder. But who killed the restorer? Lady Ashton? Perhaps. Or perhaps she wasn't the first to fear what the portrait remembers.' He frowned. 'What do you mean?' She gestured to the phonograph. That voice spoke 50 years ago, yet it sounds like the same man. The same tone. The same guilt. 'You think it's coincidence?' 'No,' she said. 'I think it's echo. Families repeat themselves. Crimes, too. Only the century changes.' Slack stared at the silent cylinder. Its grooves shimmered faintly in the lamplight circular, endless, like a secret caught in repetition. 'Should we test it again?' he asked. 'No,' said Marple. 'Once is enough. The past doesn't enjoy being summoned twice.' He sighed. 'All right, I'll seal it. Send it to London.' 'Good,' she said. 'Let experts listen. Though I expect they'll only hear what they're prepared to believe.' The wind pressed hard against the windows, rattling the glass. The phonograph needle twitched once more on its own, a faint scratch, like a whisper. Slack jumped. Marple didn't. She only looked toward the darkened portrait leaning in the corner. Its painted eyes caught the lamplight. Almost watching, she spoke softly, almost to herself. 'Voices fade, Inspector, but confessions they linger.' He turned toward her. 'You think there's more hidden?' 'There always is,' she said. The fire flared suddenly, then dimmed. Smoke curled upward in slow spirals. Slack muttered, 'I'll never understand this business.' Marple smiled faintly. 'Nor should you. Understanding ruins curiosity. And curiosity, Inspector, is what keeps the dead talking.' She reached out and closed the phonograph lid. The latch clicked. Final. Outside, thunder rolled once more, softer now, almost like applause. Inside, the wax cylinder sat quiet, its grooves holding words that time had refused to erase. And the portrait, half covered beside the fire, seemed to lean slightly forward as though listening still. Morning came pale and brittle. A thin fog clung to the lawns. Inside Ashton Hall, silence spread like dust. No one spoke much. Everyone waited for Miss Marple to make sense of it all. She sat at the writing table, notebook open, pencil sharp. Inspector Slack stood nearby, restless as always. Lady Ashton remained by the window, pale, watching rain gather on the glass. Marple began quietly, her voice steady, measured. "Let us place the pieces," she said. "Not where we wish them to be, but where they truly belong." Slack nodded, leaning forward. He had learned not to interrupt. She drew a small timeline with her pencil. 1. Lydia Green married Charles Green. She died in March 1892, officially buried, recorded in the parish ledger. She paused, eyes flicking toward Lady Ashton, but her portrait bears the date June 1892, 3 months after her burial. Impossible unless the artist painted a corpse. Lady Ashton winced. Slack grimaced. Miss Marple continued. 2. The painter Albert Price. He was commissioned under false pretenses. He believed he painted for a grieving husband. In truth, he was used to forge a signature on a new will. Slack frowned. The forged will gave Lydia's estate to her husband. "Yes," said Marple softly. "And upon his death, that estate passed to the Ashtons through marriage. A neat inheritance. Too neat." She turned a page. 3. Price left a record, a letter, later the cylinder. He feared what he'd done. He preserved evidence. He painted over it, literally. A sealed letter in the woman's hand. A confession hidden in art. The inspector tapped his pen. Then the modern Price, the restorer, finds it. "Exactly," said Marple. He begins to remove the varnish. He sees the second layer, the letter, the hidden marks. He understands what his ancestor concealed. She drew another short line on the paper. 4. He confronts Lady Ashton. Perhaps subtly, perhaps with a hint. Blackmail, Inspector. Not crude, just quiet enough to seem respectable. Slack sighed. "Money, then?" "Yes," she said. "Money and bloodlines. Old families fear scandal more than ruin." He pushed too far. Lady Ashton turned sharply. "I never saw him again after that evening." Marple didn't look up. "Perhaps not alive," she said gently. Silence pressed in again. The clock on the mantel ticked faintly, keeping rhythm with her thoughts. She continued. 5. The restorer was silenced. His car left untouched. His body staged. The studio cleaned too carefully for panic. This was not rage. It was preservation. Slack folded his arms. "You're saying someone in this house." "I'm saying," she interrupted, "someone wished to keep the past still. And stillness, Inspector, is the most suspicious condition of all." She turned the notebook toward him. In neat pencil lines lay the structure, dates, names, motives, perfect symmetry. He read it slowly. So, forged portrait, forged will, switched inheritance. 2. Prices, the painter, and the restorer. Both found the truth, both dead. "Precisely," she said. "The past and present echo, a pattern too deliberate to dismiss." Lady Ashton spoke then, her tone brittle. "You make it sound like a curse." Marple shook her head. "No curse, my lady. Only consequence." Slack rubbed his chin. "What about the missing corner of the painting?" Marple's eyes glinted faintly. "Ah, the final piece. The one someone removed in panic. It may still exist. Hidden here, or burned before dawn." He exhaled. "You never miss a detail, do you?" "I try not to," she said. "The world hides truth under layers of paint, of manners, of denial, but layers can be peeled." She closed the notebook. The faint graphite lines caught the light like tiny roads leading backward through time. Slack stood. "I'll search the house again. Servants' rooms. Storage. Attic." "Good," said Marple. "Start where guilt doesn't look." He paused at the door. "Why there?" "Because," she said quietly, "guilt is tidy. But fear Fear hides in clutter. Lady Ashton said nothing. Her face was turned toward the rain, her reflection pale in the window pane. Miss Marple gathered her things, notebook, pencil, gloves. She slipped them into her handbag. "Inspector," she said softly, "we now know who forged the past. All that remains is to see who forged the silence." The rain thickened again. The sound filled the gaps between her words. And in that hush, Ashton Hall seemed to listen, as if even the walls were beginning to remember. Evening fell heavy over Ashton Hall. Rain again, relentless. The house glowed in small islands of lamplight, each room a stage, each silence waiting. Inspector Slack gathered everyone in the drawing room. Lady Ashton, Margaret, Dr. Felton, the butler, and Miss Marple, calm, seated by the fire, hands folded neatly on her lap. The damaged portrait stood behind her, half covered, half revealed, its torn corner like an open wound. Slack cleared his throat. "Miss Marple has something to say." Then he stepped aside. She nodded once. Her voice was soft, measured. "We've been looking," she began, "at a painting that refuses to forget." No one moved. Only the rain against the windows answered. "The first lie," she said, "was not the murder. It was the portrait." Margaret frowned. "I don't understand." "You will," said Marple. "Let's start at the beginning, not the night, Mr. Price died, but the night Lydia Green's life was rewritten." She looked to Lady Ashton. "Your husband's ancestors purchased her estate, that we know, but what was never written down was who truly painted her." Dr. Felton adjusted his glasses. "Her husband, surely." "No," said Marple. "Her husband commissioned the portrait, but he didn't paint it. The artist was her lover, a servant, Albert Price." The room tightened. Even the fire seemed to still. Marple continued, steady as a clock. "He painted her, after her death, by request of her husband. But he added something, a hidden layer, his confession, and a truth he could not speak aloud." Slack's pen hovered. Marple's tone deepened. That truth was a child. Lydia's child. Not her husband's. Margaret gasped. Lady Ashton went pale. "Yes," said Marple softly. "The real heir was born in secrecy, sent away. The portrait hid that fact in the letter painted under her hands, a sealed will, a plea for protection, and a name." Slack spoke low. "The name we saw under X-ray." Marple nodded. "Precisely. The name Price." She let the words settle. The fire popped once. Rain whispered harder. "Generations later," she went on, "another Price returned, not knowing why he felt drawn here. He restored the same portrait his ancestor had painted, and in the process, uncovered his own bloodline. He realized this house, this inheritance, was never theirs." Lady Ashton's lips trembled. He demanded money?" "Yes," said Marple. "Not greed, justice. But justice asked too loudly." "Doctor!" Felton stood abruptly. "That's absurd." "Is it?" she asked gently. "You were the last to see him alive." He froze. Slack turned sharply. "Doctor?" Felton's voice faltered. "He came to me. Said he'd found proof. Said the Ashtons would lose everything. I told him to be careful." His eyes dropped. Then he laughed. Said he could hear the dead talking through paint. Miss Marple's gaze was kind but unrelenting. "You knew he was dangerous to your patrons. You warned Lady Ashton." Felton swallowed hard. She was desperate. "The scandal, the ruin. Who touched the turpentine, Doctor?" Silence. Only the clock ticked. Once. Twice. "I did," he whispered. "I meant only to destroy the evidence. I didn't kill him." "Perhaps not with intent," said Marple softly. "But guilt works faster than poison." Lady Ashton sank into a chair. Tears welled. "My family built everything on that portrait." "No," said Marple. "Your family built everything on what it concealed." Slack spoke quietly. "So the painting holds the confession of the first Price. The restorer uncovered it. The doctor helped hide it again. And the Ashtons kept the inheritance." Marple nodded once. "Until memory returned." She stood slowly, small and precise against the lamplight. Her eyes met the portrait. The woman's painted gaze glimmered faintly, as if light lived behind it. "Lydia Green," Marple said almost to the painting. "You have been waiting long enough." She turned to Slack. "Inspector, seal the canvas. The lower layers will confirm everything: the will, the confession, the child's name. The true heir was born from love, not property." Slack exhaled. "It's always love or money with you, Miss Marple." She smiled faintly. "They're the same currency, Inspector. Only one spends slower." The rain eased. The clock struck 9. Each chime quiet, final. Lady Ashton sat motionless. Margaret wept silently beside her. Dr. Felton stared at the fire, lost. Marple gathered her gloves. "The past," she said, "is patient. It waits until someone listens." Her voice lowered, and this time it chose to speak through paint. No one answered. Only the portrait watched its expression calm again, almost relieved. The case was done, but the walls of Ashton Hall still remembered every word. The storm was over. Only soft rain now, thin, forgiving. It tapped against the windows like someone asking to be let in. Morning light crept into Ashton Hall, pale, honest. It touched every surface: silver, glass, faces too tired for denial. Lady Ashton sat alone in the drawing room. The fire had burned low. Her hands, once graceful, now trembled against her teacup. No one spoke. Even the servants moved quietly, as, though guilt had rules about sound, Miss Marple entered softly. She carried no files, no evidence, just calm. Lady Ashton looked up. Her eyes were red, her voice thin. "So it's over, Miss Marple?" Marple nodded. "In one sense. But truth never ends, my lady. It simply changes rooms." Lady Ashton gave a small, bitter laugh. "My grandfather stole a fortune. I protected his theft, and all it cost was peace." Marple sat across from her. Her tone was gentle. "You protected more than fortune. You protected an illusion. We all do. Some paint theirs on canvas. Some hide it in silence." The woman's gaze drifted toward the covered portrait. It stood again by the wall, wrapped in linen. Only the gilt edge showed like a memory refusing full burial. "What will they say?" she whispered. "About me?" "That you loved your family," said Marple. "That you were afraid, and that you forgot fear never keeps a secret. It only delays it." A clock ticked somewhere far in the corridor, each sound clear, patient, final. Lady Ashton's voice softened. "My husband knew nothing. He died believing his name was clean." Marple nodded. "And that is mercy enough for one lifetime." Slack entered briefly, signed a few papers, and left again. The law had its method. But truth, Marple thought, had its rhythm slower, deeper, quieter. She rose and drew back the linen from the painting. The woman's face appeared once more. Peaceful now. No tears. No glare. Just stillness. Lady Ashton flinched slightly. Marple's gaze stayed steady. "Paint preserves truth longer than conscience does," she said softly. "It has no reason to forget," Lady Ashton whispered. "Will they take it?" "The authorities, yes. For examination. But what it reveals will belong to everyone." Silence lingered. Outside, the wind stirred through the garden leaves, brushing wet stone. The world continued, unconcerned. Marple turned to leave. Her small steps made no sound on the thick carpet. At the door, she paused. "Lady Ashton," she said gently, "we are all restorers in our own way. Some repair truth. Some repaint it. Few leave it as it was." The woman didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the portrait, on that quiet, knowing smile that had outlived them all. Miss Marple stepped into the hall. The house seemed lighter now, unburdened, yet marked forever. The inspector waited by the staircase. "Well?" he asked. "She'll talk," said Marple. "In time. Confession grows in silence." Slack nodded. "You think she deserves sympathy?" "I think," said Marple, "she deserves understanding. Sympathy is for the unlucky. Understanding is for the human." They stood there a moment, listening to the rain. The sound filled the hall, steady and cleansing. Marple glanced once more toward the drawing-room door. "Every crime," she said, "is a painting turned the wrong way. Eventually someone notices the frame doesn't fit." Slack half smiled. "You're a poet, Miss Marple." "Hardly," she said. "Just a woman who's seen too many brushstrokes." He opened the door for her. The morning air felt cool and almost kind. Birds had returned hesitant but singing again. As they walked down the path, the house behind them faded into mist. No thunder now. No echo. Only truth, drying slowly in the light. Miss Marple paused once at the gate, her umbrella still closed. "Guilt," she murmured, "is a pigment, Inspector. You can dilute it, but you never wash it out." He glanced at her, puzzled. She smiled faintly. "Best to let it dry and learn from it. Otherwise it stains everything else." They walked on in silence. The lane stretched ahead, wet and shining. And behind them, Ashton Hall stood still, its windows reflecting a new morning, and a portrait that had finally stopped watching. "Thank you for joining me in this quiet corner of mysteries. Tonight, we've walked through rain, silence, and memory. We've stood before a portrait that remembered more than it should, and we've seen how truth hides, not in shadows, but in the varnish of respectability." Miss Marple once said, "Evil rarely wears a villain's face. It comes dressed in duty, pride, and good manners." Perhaps Ashton Hall proved her right. We met a restorer chasing art, and found a family hiding guilt, a woman painted in death, a secret buried in paint, and a confession waiting 50 years to be heard. Strange, isn't it? How silence can outlive speech. How a single letter, unsent, unseen, can change the shape of every generation that follows. The storm has ended now. The truth has spoken in its calm and unforgiving voice. And as the rain dries from the glass, we're left with one lesson. Nothing stays hidden, not forever. The brush remembers, the frame remembers, and sometimes even the dead insist on being seen one last time. Thank you, dear listener, for staying through every page of this mystery, for watching the clues unfold softly, like paint drying under candlelight. Each story leaves a trace, doesn't it? A scent of old wood, a sound of rain, a question that refuses to leave. That's the charm of our little corner quiet stories, restless ghosts, and truths too polite to shout. So, as the lamps go dim, and the echo of footsteps fades through the hallways of Ashton, remember this: truth has patience. It always finds its frame. Until next time, when another story wakes, and another secret looks our way, may truth, like art, catch the light it deserves. And if this story lingered with you, if one detail stayed behind, quietly haunting your thoughts, tell me which one it was. Was it the letter that never left the hand, the voice trapped in the cylinder, or the painted eyes that finally stopped weeping? Tell me, because mysteries live longest when they're shared. Until the next light falls, good night, and thank you for listening.